This is a test of the emergency broadcast system.
In 5, check for sound. 4,
It's showtime.
3,
Let's
2,
go.
1.
You're listening to the Pro Audio Suite, a program for audio and voiceover professionals. And welcome to another Pro Audio Suite. It's just the Three Musketeers this week, with a special guest being Marice Tobias. In Sydney is Robbo. G'day, Robbo.
How you going?
Good, mate. Good, mate. Good. And in Chicago, Robert Marshall.
Hello.
Good evening.
Hello.
Good evening.
Our guest this week is Marice Tobias. For those who don't know, she's, it's hard to actually describe exactly what she does, but I'll try by saying she can help set up brands like she did for Christopher Kent, the CK UK brand. She will help you work through scripts. So she's kind of like a branding kind of coach, if that makes sense. Anyway, we'll find out more about her a bit later on in the show.
And then some.
Yeah. Now, Robert, you got a story about a commercial you worked on for Coors Beer.
Yeah, they wanted some sound design for essentially their campaign was the coldest tasting beer, and they wanted basically to convey cold was the whole thing. And we went around and around with various ideas, like the mountains and everything else, and something that just catches people's ears. And it was just so simple in the end. What I did is I ended up going into the booth and sort of creating my, this will sound funny, I went into the booth and created my own wind. No.
We've heard that before.
Yes. So sort of this howling wind of the mountains and whatnot. And it was, really simple. It's just literally, if I can do this again, it was that kind of thing.
Ah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Ooh, I feel like a beer.
Yeah, I do.
I feel like an icy cold beer. That's weird. That's ASMR.
And
That's
did
a tingling sensation.
I get very lightheaded when I do that.
But did it work? Were they happy?
It did. They bought it, and it was on many commercials.
Nice.
In fact, I do remember kind of feeling like I wish I was a voice talent, because that all got logged in under just sound effects, essentially.
Right.
But that's what I was hired to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was. I did a bunch of spots. In fact, they ended up doing some other spots later someplace else, and I think back in the day we had to send a DAT tape over with me going. And
so the obvious question for me that comes from all that, though, Robert, is did you at least have to experiment with opening cans of beer at some stage before you came up with that idea?
Well, that was some of it.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Absolutely.
And there was sounds of ice breaking that we played around with.
Right.
But this worked well a lot because of their logo, which was, the mountains. So there was that.
Because the big thing about opening cans of beer,
simple.
though, is once they're open, you can't just leave them to waste. You've got to drink them.
Yes,
I got an even better story. So we were doing a commercial for a pickle company, and they wanted the sound of their jar being open. And so we had to get a jar to open it, Foley this, sent the assistant across the street, grab a jar of pickles, right? Open. Great. Clients come in a couple hours later. They love everything. Someone spots the jar of pickles, like by the window of the booth, and it's not the same brand of pickles as the client. And they were not happy. And it was one of those things really? They kind of all sound the same.
But ours are different, yeah.
Right.
That's right, exactly.
We did replace that. So there is truth in advertising.
It's funny the things we do, though, because I did a job for Subaru here in Australia. This would be a good few years ago now, back in the mid-90s. Mid-2000s, so 2005, 2006, around there somewhere. And it was for their Outback, which is sort of like their station wagon, family wagon sort of thing. And but the TV commercial was of the WRX rally car sort of racing around the outback of Australia, and they supplied a whole bunch of location video to the editor, and they supplied me a whole bunch of location sound. And they'd had mics in the car, on the car, around the car, everything was really well done. So I laid it all up underneath this TV commercial anyway. But then someone came in and they decided that there wasn't enough sound of gravel hitting the car when this car was taking corners and all that sort of stuff. So I actually went out into the garden, grabbed a whole bunch of pebbles and all that sort of stuff, brought them into the studio and found a metal toolkit that was sitting in the back room, emptied all the tools out and turned that upside down and proceeded to mic up and record me sort of dropping pebbles and running pebbles along this metal toolkit to get the sound of pebbles hitting the car as this WRX was taking the corner. So the things we find ourselves recording from time to time is quite bizarre, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you a story like that, very similar, but nothing to do with recording. When my dad joined the army in the Second World War, his training in 1940, they would go down, pretend to be sitting in a truck, the back of a truck. They had a stick which represented their gun, but they weren't actually sitting on anything. They were squatting in the middle of the village on the green, and then some guy, the sergeant major or whoever he was, had a paint can full of pebbles, and he'd shake the can, and that was the machine guns going off, and they had to disembark the lorry and get themselves into a position to attack or defend. How bizarre is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like that old thing, like give up your sight or give up your hearing, and tough one, but I might give up my sight.
Yeah.
Could you just do it could you have one eye and one ear?
Oh, that'd be the way to go if you had to lose two things, but
Yeah.
mono's not so bad.
Yeah. No, I don't know.
Now, you also did a bit of a Brian Eno with the Source Connect sound.
Yeah, it totally measures up to the level of Brian Eno. I had a room full of synthesizers, and I was trying to figure out, what's the sound of Source Connect going to be? No, it was all done in Pro Tools, and really just two sine waves and some reverb, and it was early on, needed a sound, and just made it. I can't even, it's like some of these things are just how you're feeling that day. What do you feel like? And and that became the call sound of when you receive a call from Source Connect.
Must be the nice thing too when you're your own client. So it's sort of like, there's no one in the back of the room going,
It went very smoothly.
It would. Yeah. It was probably the smoothest session you've ever done, right?
I think the whole thing took 15 minutes.
Yeah.
It wasn't, it was like, it needs to be short, needs to be percussive so that it can, stand out if you hear it across the room. But that was one where it needed to be, we did want it to be somewhat iconic in the sense that someone would know that is Source Connect. And I think people do know that. I'm not sure that we've really, taken any polls to see whatever, like if I play this sound, you know what that is. But I think a lot of across the VO industry, certainly people would be like, "Ba-doop. Oh, I know what that is."
Oh, absolutely. It's like the the Skype calling sound or, anything like that.
The Mac boot up.
The Mac boot up. There you go. There's one. Absolutely.
But the Mac boot up, I was thinking of that as we've been talking about this. That is so simple.
Yeah. It's just a
Some of the
chime.
best ones are simple.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. The Mac boot up is just a boom, it's a chord.
Yeah,
Right.
that's what I mean. It's like, imagine some guy's getting paid. They're going, we just paid this guy how much to do, my kid plays that chord.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the fact that we're sitting here having this...
Sorry, go ahead, Robbo.
I was just going to say, the fact that we're sitting here having this conversation sort of probably proves the point why he made that so much money, because it has become so iconic.
Not as much as Brian Eno.
Yeah. But we got the job to do, many years ago, the sound for GameCube. And at that time, they were competing a lot with Sega. And so Sega's sound was just a guy going like, Sega! Kind of like that.
Yeah, that's right.
And so from the ad agency, and not really from the client, but from the ad agency, the instructions were that they didn't want it to be the name. And we went through days. I probably made 200 sounds more. I couldn't even tell you. It was like a day, at least a day or two. And right at the end of one of the days, my boss walks in and is like, "What are you doing?" "Oh, we're making sounds. We're doing explorations." "Oh, okay. Who's it for?" "It's for GameCube." "I'll do a few." "All right." So he doesn't get the direction, which is don't say the name. and he throws his assistant in the booth, and she says GameCube. And then actually, because we had been doing this before for some other fun things, I remember playing jokes where you say something, reverse it, figure out what it sounds like reversed, and say that, and then reverse it again. For example, I long ago figured out that if you say "that is my shoe," it roughly comes out to "worship Satan" backwards. And
Well, there you go.
things I'm into.
Only you could do that.
and so anyways, so she's in the booth. She says GameCube. She hears herself backwards, and she sort of, I'm pretty sure that's how it went. And then she emulated herself saying it backwards, and then it got reversed. So it becomes a very strange GameCube. And it got presented to the client. They heard their name, and it was very simple math to figure out which mnemonic sound they went with. I mean, it could almost be a game. You just have to, until someone fails, it's like, keep on naming mnemonics. Windows, Macintosh, whatever, Yahoo.
Intel.
Dun, dun, dun. Yep.
Yeah.
Certainly
Wouldn't mind
that
having
one.
the paycheck for that one either.
Oh, some of them would be great.
And I wonder how some of these go, because sometimes they're just buyouts, and it really, what's funny is like it's the same process, but it depends on who you hire. So you hire a sound designer, there's no royalties. You hire a music house, maybe there's royalties. Sometimes these things are literally just like something that gets thrown onto one spot at the end of, like, just in a day in a session, like, here you go, okay, we'll have a new and then it catches and people are like, well, let's use that again.
Yeah.
And it gets used over and over, and it was never even necessarily planned on being a mnemonic, but it just fit and was used and gets used over and over, and it organically becomes a mnemonic.
Absolutely.
Now, talking about branding, though, you got a couple of examples because you've got the studio in Chicago, Someone,
Yep.
and of course, Source Elements, Source Connect. I'm just thinking, we'll do the studio for a start, Someone. Obviously, summing is part of the reason you called Someone,
yeah.
I guess.
Mm-hmm. There's a number of thoughts with it, actually. So the idea that, audio is always the last step in the process typically, although not always, animations, it's earlier on, but that Someone sort of acknowledging that all these projects are worked on by a lot of people. You have video editors and assistants and graphics people and sound people, and we're one of those. At the same time, playing on the summation and that whole idea of mixing. Again, the other idea, which is just kind of a funny name, like, who mixed it? I don't know, someone.
Yes. Cool.
Nice.
So but those were the main thoughts we had when we were naming that. And actually, probably one of the strongest ones was just sort of the team effort and the somewhat anonymizing of the effort and acknowledging that it is definitely a team effort with the whole process of creating media.
Wow, you put a lot of thought into yours. Voodoo Sound, there was two options. There was Voodoo Sound or the Sound Lounge. Because at the time the Rolling Stones were on tour, they were on the Voodoo Lounge tour. And they were the two options that I came up with at the time, and I did agonize over. But
and then
could you
there's Sound Lounge in New York, very, very big studio.
yeah,
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, probably
that's
wasn't. That wouldn't have been the best choice. But
No.
there's a Sound Lounge in Melbourne, actually.
yeah. Well, we're talking this was
really?
when Voodoo Sound started in 1997. So this was a while ago now.
I think you predate them.
Yeah. I had
Yeah.
this discussion with a marketing person not long ago, and they were sort of suggesting that because I'm sort of a one-man band and will probably never have a staff, and because most of my work comes to Robbo, not to Voodoo Sound, that I should think about changing the name of my company to reflect that. And one of the names they came up with was Just Ask Robbo. So it's actually something that I'm thinking about at the moment, because it's not something, Voodoo Sound's not something that I'm ever going to be able to sell anyway. It's not going to be, because, as I said, my clients come to me because I am me. So maybe not a bad way to think about doing that is to reflect that in the name of the company and just change the name to Just Ask Robbo. So it's actually something that I'm bouncing around at the moment.
I've got an idea for you. You can actually get really, really deep and call yourself Robbo.
Hi, Robbo. Do you reckon Mac might have a problem with that?
No, I'm
palindrome,
thinking iRobbo. I'm going back to iRobot, you see.
Yeah, right. There you go.
I actually like voodoo sound. I think it acknowledges, here, like the, I think to some degree, sound is like this mysterious thing to some people,
Yeah.
And so many times, like sound design, what is it? And,
That's right.
And often it is really simple, actually. And it's more about the idea and the directness and not sort of coming up with the most complex way around doing something, but really making sure that you deliver what is specifically necessary and not really. And the other thing about sound often is that, like, which is great, which is if it sounds good, it is good.
True.
Done.
Yeah.
The process is that, and the results are what really matter.
I think there's also something about sound that people like myself and people outside of the business, you can sit in the studio and you can't, I couldn't work out how you get from one point to the next particularly. But the difference is miles apart from something raw like we're doing now to something processed, mixed, and, on the air.
Absolutely.
And that's the voodoo.
Color is the same way.
Yeah.
Color correction. Yeah. It's like huge, amazing difference in the way that picture translates and makes you feel and hits you. And it's like, it's kind of funny because, like, for me, it's like all the aspects of color, it's like, don't know anything about it. But at the same time, it's a lot like EQing sound. It's just different spectrum.
Yes. Well, that's basically what it is, isn't it? That's right.
Yeah. Well, it's like going on a movie set. You sit in a movie set and it looks bloody awful. You're just going, what? This is crap.
What's all these
It's
green
like
screens
shit.
in the background?
Yeah, and all the flats and everything. Everything's wobbling around everywhere.
I had the chance to go on like a Hollywood set, and it was so funny because you imagine the street scene in New York, and some kids are sitting on the steps of a building, and then you have that like sort of concrete railing along the side of some of these buildings.
Yep.
I mean, things made out of paper. Looks like concrete. That's like just like walking up to it, you're like, man, that's like concrete, and touch it, hollow.
Yeah. Yeah,
Smoke
I was on a
and
movie
mirrors.
set, an early movie set for a movie called Robbery Under Arms, and with a guy who's now quite a well-known director, but he got me on set to have a look around, and we walked into what was this beautiful ballroom, and it was all marbled, everywhere. But of course, it was just, plywood that some guy managed to paint to look like this beautiful marbled, fireplaces and all this, intricate sort of work. It was quite incredible.
Yeah, and in a way, kind of to some degree, sound design is like that set. You're painting this picture. Unlike an actual house, no one's going to go into that and really look at what it was. So as long as you paint that picture and create that believable scene and people suspend their disbelief, job done. You've made the scene. I mean, a little bit farther away, but I did a spot where a skinny guy is sitting on the bus and a big, giant, fat guy sits down next to him and kind of scoots over. What's the sound of this? And I don't know where we came up with it, and I just took one of those plastic water bottles and crushed it. There it is. This skinny guy getting crushed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does anybody hear that and think, it's a water bottle? Like, no. It's like, that's the sound of the guy getting crushed.
I had a radio spot a couple of weeks ago, and it was for Perisher, which is one of the ski fields here in Australia, and it was being a radio spot, obviously with nothing to play off visually. It took a bit of work. There was one guy saying to the other, "Hey, check this out," and then starts sort of peeing and writing his name in the snow. And, the other guy goes, "Oh, what? You're not going to, yeah. Look, check this out, blah, blah, blah." But anyway, I scratched my head for hours about what I was going to do for the sound of, writing his name in the snow, and ended up going out to the, because my studio's at home, went out the front and found some cardboard, an old cardboard box, brought it in and stuck it on the floor and got a jug of water and was just sort of pouring, the water over it, mucking around, and finally with a bit of EQ and a bit of mucking around, got it to sound pretty much like the sound of weeing in the snow. So yeah, it's You got to scratch your head sometimes and stop and think, don't you? It's like, how the hell am I going to do this?
Well, hopefully you washed your hands first before you scratched your head.
That's right. Absolutely.
And remind me not to use any of the mics in your...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If I can find it before we put this show out, I'll well, not if I can find it. If I remember it before we put this show out, I'll throw it up at the end, so everyone have a listen to.
Sometimes, you get a job and just kind of Foleying something, and I need the sound of someone hitting their head on the wall. It's like thump. This doesn't sound like what it's supposed to. I mean, probably the biggest example of this is every karate movie. Like, those punches sound like that, and they don't,
Yeah,
like,
that's right. Yeah, those big fat whack.
Yeah.
It's almost becomes that Batman. Bow. Bow.
Or guns are another great example. I mean, if you've ever heard a gun in real life, it's like,
yeah,
is that a firecracker?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Name me one movie that's actually used the sound of a real gun as their Foley.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's more like two or three mixed together.
Yeah.
Or it's the perspective of when it was recorded, or where it was recorded, so close to the gun, and it sounds huge, but from a distance,
that's right.
It doesn't have the same sound.
Exactly. Well, we should probably get on to this week's interview.
Yeah, I was just about to do the same thing myself, talking about building the illusion, hopefully building my illusion. This is Marice Tobias. Marice Tobias, how are you?
I'm great, thank you. I'm curious, what made you reach out to me? How did you first hear about me?
I heard about you because I must be on a database of yours, and I I do get your newsletters about upcoming events. It wasn't just that, it was also Christopher Kent. We interviewed him a couple of months back, and he mentioned that he had spent time with you, and it was you that came up with the idea of CKUK.
Yes.
So we thought, well, we need to talk to you because that was a stroke of genius.
Oh, thank you. Well, I draw on my advertising and marketing background when I work with my clients. And I just think that everyone, now more than ever, everyone should be a brand. And that was the beginning of that kind of thought process with someone who wanted to take a step forward and not just be a very worthy, very talented person, but stand out in some way. And, he did this quite a long time ago. And it was wonderful to see that it worked for him, and it continues to work for him.
Does it work for him in the UK, do you know, or is it more for his overseas work?
Oh, when I first worked with him, it was for the UK. We expanded to the US over the years, but at first it was his wanting to reinforce his standing there in the UK market and across the continent.
Because it's really, we were talking about this before, the difference between Australians and New Zealanders, I should add, and basically the rest of the world. We hate blowing our own trumpet. We feel really uncomfortable about that, and if anybody does it, they're quickly ripped down, the tall poppy syndrome. So how would you manage someone in a country that's a bit hostile to self-promotion?
It's about helping people hire you, and it is giving those who make those decisions a container in which to place the idea of you. And so that's very different than bragging about yourself. That's, as I say, giving people an understanding of what it feels like to be in the presence of your voice, or something that separates you out from all the other possibilities. And I found that even in areas where there had been resistance, it really is about doing it in such a way where you're not patting yourself on the back. You're simply making a statement about yourself and your work. And then, the materials that are on the site or accessible to the producers back up that claim or that statement. And it gives them, again, a way to start cataloging you in their brain.
So for some, and I'm not asking for a free advice here, but I know you've done a bit of research before we jumped on, so you've got a bit of an idea of what I do. Where do you think I may have gone wrong with the way I've marketed myself, as in the images that I portray on my website, for instance?
Well, I don't think it's wrong. I just think that because the industry keeps evolving as well. So basically, yes, there was a lot of resistance when I first started talking about marketing. But if you look at the manner in which the world has embraced the idea of making a statement about itself and then having people follow and become part of the tribe or fan base. I think that the world has changed quite a bit in accepting the fact that there are statements everywhere. And, I don't think there's as much resistance as there used to be. Having said that, there's always got to be someone who starts the ball rolling. When I worked with Chris in the UK, it was Chris. And then others saw that, his career didn't, immediately disappear because he was making a statement about himself, aside from his availability. And as time goes on, this becomes more and more prevalent in all the areas in the countries I work in. But I have a saying, which is the artist leads the culture. Someone needs to step up and embrace this manner of presenting oneself to the marketplace. And when the rest of the community sees that, no one died, nor did the career, and that it's quite helpful, I think that that's going to be the beginning of the revolution. The other is looking at the people who can hire you. They're generationally more open to this kind of presentation than generations before.
Looking at the industry here, and I can't speak for the United States, but I'm sure it's a similar situation. The people that you need to speak to inside advertising agencies these days are increasingly younger and younger than sort of people of Andrew's and my ilk. Do you think that puts artists and creators such as us and in our age group in a more difficult situation than someone younger?
Only if you think you do. And that's not a glib remark. That's really the way that I look at it. I've often had people over the years say to me, well, in my day, and I go, isn't today your day? It's really about not making how it is now wrong.
Yeah.
And so you look at different areas of the business of communication, entertainment, music. There are people who have outlasted the sell-by date. What is it about these people? What is it about the Rolling Stones? What is it about certain music that makes them timeless? And there's a relevance that they maintain in their ability to embrace what's happening now and bring it into their music or their art or their speaking. And I think that's the balance that I help people continue to strike between what it is that people know and love about you and what it is that is happening now, and how do we that part of your creative palette without you trying to sound like a 22-year-old or without you, betraying what it is that is your core competency. That's the most interesting challenge for me, and why my focus in my work is the established ongoing career as opposed to newcomers. There are plenty of people for newcomers to work with, but my focus has always been for the established career to make sure that the established career continues to grow and stays on the radar.
It's certainly a changing market out there, isn't it?
Yes, it is. What, the alternative is to just fold your arms and go, well, I don't like what's going on. And, often I'll say, well, as soon as we hang up, I'll call the industry and make sure they know that Jerry doesn't like it the way it is.
Yes.
Ain't that the truth?
Yeah.
No. It's fine over, in a social situation to kick it around. But in the reality, that's how it is. Mm-hmm. So what's the alternative? My thinking is let's see how we continue to keep you timeless and relevant.
Now, talking about time, I want to talk about your background, because you've had an interesting career, but I want to go right back to the beginning, where you actually started. And you mentioned, sort of touched on it earlier, in advertising. Where did you start?
I started actually in production as a script supervisor. I was when I graduated university in South Florida, I had majored in film production and television and theater. And when I was graduating, the head of our department felt that he had done me a terrible disservice because my focus was directing and writing and producing. And he felt that I, was not being realistic at the time. And, that perhaps another craft would be more sensible for me to pursue. And through a series of circumstances, I wound up becoming a script supervisor. And, but if anybody talked to me for more than a minute, they would realize that my goal was to become a director. And I did become the first woman directing commercials in New York. And, it was at a time when that was a very new idea. So my background was, production, then directing, and also freelancing as a copywriter. So with all of those skills in place, I was offered a job at an ad agency in California. And I had directed a campaign for them. And I came out and I joined the agency and became one of the creative heads, continued to direct the commercials and all the media, and ran the copy department. And it was at that time that I was getting invitations. The ad agency was in Newport Beach, California, which is about 50 miles south of LA. But it's a fluid market, and I was getting invitations from workshops in LA to come up and guest direct. And I knew eventually I wanted to take the act into LA. And so this was a way for me to start gaining a footprint. And I got a call from, at that time, the only casting director in voiceover, Bob Lloyd. And he suggested that I have my own workshop. And at the time in LA, there were 10 workshops, approximately. So I thought that might be too many. It's ironic. There are over 100 now. And that's just in the LA. And, the coaching and training arena is quite saturated. So I said to him, well, Bob, there are 10 workshops. I don't know if there's a need for an 11th. And he said, nothing for the working pro. And he made an observation, and it really took hold with me. He said, some people are still doing the same read they did when they got in the business. This was quite a while ago. And I said, well, I noticed that, but I said, in directing commercials, you leave at the dailies and you don't go to finish. So I was never involved in the choice of the voice. And often I wouldn't hear what the choice was until it was on the air. And it was a pretty traditional read. And I figured, well, that must be what voiceover is. But to hear your comment, I think, okay, I think there is a place for me. So I started with a workshop in Los Angeles, and then a client of mine had moved from LA to Washington because he was and still is the most used voice of the Republican Party. And he suggested I come to DC and do a workshop there with a group of people who were doing well, never had any training, many of whom had come out of broadcasting and or theater. And that was the beginning of my traveling. And from there, I came back to LA and I spoke to a young talent who at that time was in my first workshop. His name is Bo Weaver, and he's quite a legend in the industry and very, very brilliant. And anyone who is interested in voiceover, I always send them to his website because he's extremely articulate and very, very grounded in his advice. And so he came in for a private session and he said, how did your trip go? And I said, I think I could travel with my work. And he said, where do you want to go? I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I'm a radio gypsy. I know somebody everywhere. So it was based on Bo's suggestion and connecting me with some of his former radio mates that I started traveling. So I went to Dallas and Houston and Chicago and Detroit, and that's how I started moving around the country, then into Canada. And then I received, at the time, it was a fax from a gentleman in the UK. And what he said was, can you help me? My agent in London thinks I sound too much like an announcer. And I thought halfway around the world, it's the same challenge. And so I went over to London and I did my first workshop there. And then little by little, it was word of mouth. And I started traveling quite extensively, and I still do, with my work. And the reason that I continue doing this on an in-person basis is because of the isolation that this industry has now imposed on everyone. And I see how delighted everyone is to just meet and greet and hang out with people who share some quality time that has disappeared from the industry and from the landscape of being a voice talent. So that, in a nutshell, is, I've brought you up to date.
So based on that, with that journey so far, what sort of have been the most dramatic changes that you've seen?
Well, it's the technology. It's changed our world. And what it's done is it's put people who are basically very social into isolation and, imposed on so many people being their own recording engineer and being their own director. So my seminars this year are focused on self-directing and giving people the tools to sit back and analyze a read objectively rather than being so subjective. Because I interviewed agents and managers and casting people and producers as well as talent, and I said, what's the number one issue right now? And they all said the self-directed read. So that's what I decided to focus on this year. And so far, it's been, frankly, the most well-received event I've offered in a long time. So I'm going to be continuing once our summer here is over, picking up in September on up to our Christmas holidays. I'll continue with, I'm calling it tricky business, the art and craft of self-direction. And then we'll see what issue comes to the foreground for next year. I usually start planning about 3 to 6 months in advance for my travel.
It's interesting with self-direction because, like myself, a lot of my clients are in other countries and I never ever get to hear the finished product.
Right.
Which makes it really tricky because you're not only trying to, break down the script and work out the script, but you don't know how it's going to sit in the environment it's going to be used in. And that's
exactly.
a major hurdle.
Exactly. I talk about the fact that on the flyleaf of what will be my long-threatened book, there will be a quote from Bob Seger in his song Night Moves. And the quote is, working on mysteries without any clues.
Yes, that's a great line. Yeah,
that's
great
true.
line. Yeah.
And that's pretty much your business. You have to go on, instinct. You have to let the writing speak to you. The writing sometimes even more than the specs or the brief, because a lot of times they will write that, introduction to the project because they think they have to. But, I've often said in other areas of the business, in the performing crafts, actors, when they're being given the sides for a television show or for a feature film, they aren't given the specs. They're just given a quick character description. And then, the creative team wants to see what you do with it. And that's my suggestion, which is that paragraph or sometimes longer has been written for the casting conversation. Once a piece of copy comes to you, you need to respond to it as if, it's a job. The casting conversation is over. But what talent too often do is they try and double down on the very reason that the material came to. So the reads tend to maybe overwrought or overthought or, in some way just more than they should be, more leaned on than they should be, because they don't know that they're probably exactly right for the read if they just step up to the mic and deliver based on their own instincts.
It's funny, isn't it? Because a lot of people try and copy other people, which I always find slightly intriguing. In fact, I have to admit I've done that myself, where you think, well, they're successful, so I'll try and do what they're doing. But the trouble is, of course, they own that space. You're not going to get in there.
Yeah, and if you look at when, let's say, a company or a network or, some buyer goes to choose another voice for their signature, they rarely look to duplicate what they already have. They're looking to make a change. And therefore, when you're given the opportunity to audition, I have a client I'm working with tomorrow up in Canada who has this opportunity for a very, very big network job. And while they sent some samples of the existing voice, I'm assuming this person is still with us. I mean, even when someone has passed away, most of the time, they're not looking for a voice match. They're looking for something that moves the needle forward for them.
It's interesting, isn't it? I was talking to a mate of Andrew's and mine just yesterday, a guy called Lofty Fulton here in Australia, who's a well-known voiceover artist. He, in fact, is the voice of MasterChef Australia, which I only found out through Lofty yesterday is actually the biggest cooking show on television in the history of the world. The Australian version of MasterChef is actually now on air in 186 countries around the world.
That's outstanding. Lofty and I are quite good mates.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, just don't go looking for him in a bar because you'll find it hard to find him. But
Yeah, good on you.
in a crowded bar.
I think a pretty good bookends because I've said to him I have scoliosis and I've been shrinking quite consistently, and I said won't be long, Lofty, that you and I see eye to eye.
You're looking him right in the eye. Yeah, look, Lofty and I have known each other for 20 years, so I'm allowed to say that. Just by the way, but he's is as good natured as he can be. Yeah.
By the same token, a couple of years ago, and I've done a lot of speaking at conferences, and he had planned to come over, and one of the aspects of my speaking is to bring talent up on stage and demonstrate what I talk about. And so Austin was coming over to Promax, and it was here in Los Angeles. And I thought, I want him to be respected, and I want him to have as much dignity as he deserves. So I said, do you own a tuxedo? And he said, I do. And I said, so I had everybody dress in a way that kind of was an echo of what it felt like to be in the presence of their voice. So one person wore a Hawaiian shirt and someone else wore his baseball cap, turned around, just as something to, give a visual anchor for what they were doing. And I made sure that we had a riser for him. And I talked to the crew and I said, we want to do this as discreetly and as low-key as possible. So he walks on stage, he comes over to the podium, he steps up, and he goes to work. And, of course, the started speaking, he silenced the room. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that, it was just very heartwarming to see that. And it has to do with the manner in which he carries himself. And then once he starts to work, it's irrefutable that the man has a gift.
Absolutely. The reason I raised him and the MasterChef experience, coming back to the topic we were just on, is he was telling me that he actually got a call the other day from a television network in Pakistan that runs MasterChef, and they had decided that to add some authenticity to their MasterChef Australia promos, they actually got him to voice them. But yeah, just in terms of where work comes from and how, milking existing clients can lead to further work, I thought that was a really interesting example.
Well, that's when you become an icon. And the very fact that you're saying the words is an endorsement. It elevates the idea. And that, to me, is ultimately the goal. Yeah. That you're seeing beyond simply telling the story, but telling it in such a way that it makes the story that much more valuable because you're telling the story.
It's the same. It's the same with Robert Lee, isn't it? I mean, with Mythbusters, I mean that certainly given him an international profile which he wouldn't have had before.
Well, I think that technology has given everybody the opportunity to become global, and it's up to you and it's up to us to seize the moment, to seize the opportunity, and see that the possibilities really are endless. There's no limit to who can hire you, where, and it's just a matter of making sure that the materials that you produce and the images that accompany your statement are in places where as many people as possible can see you. That's the goal of marketing. And you can always say no, but let's keep those requests coming in.
So how do you see what you're doing now fitting into the future of the industry?
Well, I've been banging the drum for being a brand for a very long time. And I just think that as going forward, it becomes essential. It's no longer a choice. It's essential that each person have some sort of a statement, an image to separate you from the vast ocean of choices. I don't think there's a number that anybody can put on how many people are pursuing voiceover work on any given day. A client of mine in Canada some years ago did some research through the unions, and this was just in, this wasn't even North America, this was just in the U.S. He said on any given day, this was in 2009, 1.3 million people were pursuing voiceover work. That's just, the U.S., which of course is a very large market. But how many people globally are pursuing the work and are expats living in India, living in, some far-flung areas, but still available in English or their native languages, and are working quite happily from their home studios. So what is it that makes you stand out so that you become the choice? Even before the materials are sent out, what makes them choose you? You've got to give people a reason above and beyond the fact that you're really, really good at what you do. I quote this T-shirt a lot. It was out some years ago, and it said, "I may not be perfect, but parts of me are excellent." And you really have to believe in that.
Yeah.
And there are areas I cannot add up a line of figures. I figured that one out a long time ago. I have a business manager who handles anything that to do with numbers. It turns out, I found out as an adult that I was dyslexic, and so I accept that, and I accept the fact that the people who are at that company are really, really good at what they do, and that's why I work with them. So we all have something that we've been given as a gift, and it's up to us to honor it. And I don't think that that's being egotistical. I think that's actually operating from gratitude.
It's funny you should say about being dyslexic. I've done this quote, used this quote many times before, but on several occasions I've gone in for sessions, and the producer has said, "Yeah, great read, but now can you read what's written on the page?"
That's a nice touch.
Yeah.
Their words.
Yeah,
Sometimes they run into cliches so many times, the minute you see the start of a sentence, your brain automatically thinks the rest of it. And especially in the midsection of a commercial, because so many phrases are, they're there for a reason. I was directing a campaign some years ago in New York for toothpaste, and I saw the writer-producer sitting in a corner while we were waiting for lighting, and he was literally pulling on his hair. So I went over and I said, "Is there something wrong? Is there something we can help you with?" And he said, No. He said, "I've been on this account for 8 years. My client doesn't seem to understand. There are just so many ways you can say clean, fresh breath."
Yeah.
Yeah. So you see that, you see the beginning of something, and maybe your brain jumps to what you think the conclusion is, or you really are dyslexic, and many creative people are. It just means that the brain's working faster than the mouth can keep up.
There's that interesting thing on Facebook. It's been up for years. I'm sure you would have seen it, where they've taken a sentence and all the words are spelt the same, except they jumble the letters up.
Yes.
In each word. So, but as you read it, it makes complete sense, and you can actually read it as it should be, because your brain instantly sees the word. It just sees the combination of letters and says, "Oh, well, that's that word." And
right.
It's incredible. And it's no wonder that voice actors trip over themselves so often when you realise how many combinations there could possibly be.
Yeah, clean, fresh breath. I mean, how many different ways can you say that?
That's right.
The way that I discovered I was dyslexic is I was in line at a grocery store or a convenience store, and there was Time magazine. And it said, "If you can read this, you're dyslexic." And I didn't understand what the deal was. And I turned around, it was a gentleman behind me, and I said, "I don't understand." And he said, "It's upside down and backwards." And fine to me. So that was the beginning. And I noted the word dyslexia. It was dyslexia. It was the first time I'd seen it. And then I went home and started doing some research. And I thought, I think I can think of a couple of ways that might be the case. And it turns out there are 132 ways to be dyslexic.
There you go. It must have been a bit of an epiphany moment for you then. Oh, that explains a lot of things.
Yeah, it does. And again, it has a lot to do with, the nerve endings and the synapses, but also the brain moving very quickly. And it's moving faster now than ever before because everything's accelerated.
Yeah, well, technology certainly is playing a major role in that, that's for sure.
Yes, it's just, and the people who can hire you grew up with technology. And so it doesn't take them as long as it did, generationally, the prior group to get something. They get it before they even get it, which is why everything is quicker, shorter, more succinct than ever before.
Yeah. The downside of that is things like attention span, though. Apparently, our attention span is now shorter than a goldfish's.
Right.
So although it has an upside, it certainly has a downside as well.
Gain in the what is it? Gain in the process of loss, or loss in the process of gain.
That's the one. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and again, what can we do about it? We can read a book once in a while, go sit under a tree and commune with nature, and get ourselves back to that resting place. But our world moves very, very quickly, and if we resist it, all we're doing is keeping ourselves in place.
Now, just one last question, which because we've become more and more global, because of technology, do you think that voices are becoming more global than they have done before?
Yes, some voices, not all.
Which ones in particular are?
Well, it's very individual. It has to do with image. It has to do with what we call here sizzle factor. The voice that started all of this, this celebrity consciousness was Don LaFontaine, who very consciously, because I used to do what called ride-alongs. I used to ride with him in his limo quite often. And at one point he said to me, "I've hired a publicist." And I said, "Oh, okay." And he said, "Yeah, there are going to be other people doing what I do." He said, "But before that happens, I'd kind of like people to know who they've been hearing all these years." And I said, "Why not?" And so he, was very conscious in making sure that people understood that was who had been talking to them, especially in movie theaters, all those years. And I think he deserved that acknowledgement and recognition. But he did two things. First of all, he created this celebrity consciousness in voiceover, and he opened up the idea of voiceover to people who may not have had that thought. And, even before technology made it possible for so many people to launch themselves onto the marketplace, the idea of a voiceover career became a much more common thought than it had been before.
Yeah, so back to my other question, though. What accents do you think work internationally and what accents don't work internationally?
I think that's one of the things I noticed when I went to the UK is that accents within the UK come and go. It's a fashion thing, and it could be because of an artist or an actor. A movie comes out and the lead has a certain accent. I think the Australian accent is used when we want people to be more relaxed, more playful, and taking some risks in what they're saying. The English accent, I remember when I first went over to the UK, I heard what I assumed was the English version of an American accent. I didn't quite recognize it because it wasn't full-on American. And I asked why in the world people were using that read. And they said, well, when we want someone to sound like they know what they're talking about, we hire you guys. I said, that's not why we hire you. So there is a saying that says the expert is the man from out of town. So sometimes by using a voice from another place, it gives some sort of validity or endorsement that is assumed based on the accent and the culture. What accents don't play well, that has so very much to do with the sensibilities of the culture. One thing we do know is that just in terms of films, comedy doesn't travel as well as action and adventure. That's much more translatable. So the dramatic voice probably has a better chance of a widespread global career than a comedic delivery. Because comedy is very specific to the culture that it's in. So I don't know if I'm exactly answering your question, but, we hear accents all the time. The Irish accent, very playful. There are a lot of accents within the empire that give us permission to be more relaxed, or the English accent itself, a little more formal.
Yeah, no, that's exactly the question, the answer I was looking for. It is interesting, and there are certain accents that just will not work no matter what you do with them, unless it's for something so specific.
Exactly.
You can get away, yeah. No, it's interesting. It's funny because we were talking about this before with, I think Nicole Kidman is the perfect example to use, actually, because when she first became successful in America, she adopted an American accent, and she had that accent for years. And it wasn't until, and I can't even think what the movie was. There were a couple of movies anyway that came out of Australia that were hugely successful. And there were more Australian actors going to America and working in Hollywood, that her accent then went back to where it is now, which is an Australian accent.
I am personally amazed at the Australian ability to do an American accent better than anyone, better than the Brits. There's a show on right now with one of the characters being played by a British actor who I absolutely adore his work, Matthew McFadden. And he's classically trained, and this is the first time I've heard him do an American accent. And he's working very hard at it because he is playing an American. And so very many of the Australian actors, it just seems to be, I don't know if it's the training, I don't know if it's the ear, but the Australian actors who do an American accent are spot on.
Do you know the funny thing, though? Conversely, I have yet to come across anybody, and it could be anybody from the UK, US, anywhere around the world, who can do an Australian accent. Even Meryl Streep played Lindy Chamberlain in a movie that was around,
Do you know who worked, though? Do you know which one did work? The guy who was the lead in the movie Lion.
Really? I didn't. Okay, I haven't seen Lion.
Man, I'll tell you, his accent is absolutely spot on. You would never pick that he wasn't Australian.
Right. Okay, there you go. I stand corrected.
Language is a way of belonging. There's a psychology to the language. There's a musicality to it. And you either have an ear. I mean, some people, have a facility to learn languages very quickly and be very credible in all of them. And some people, no matter what, they can speak the language, but they still have the accent from their native language. I think it's a gift. It's just something that some people have, some people don't. And for some reason, the Australians have, the ability to, and I think part of it has to do with, if you look at the various cultures in the English-speaking world, I think that sensibility-wise, Americans, Australians are the closest.
Yeah.
It's just in terms of being mavericks and breaking away from, the mother tongue, all of that.
Yeah.
So there's a similarity in our psychology that may make it that much easier. But it is a masterful accomplishment if you can do an entire film or an entire stage play in another accent and not once drop out. That's masterful.
Although you ask any Aussie on the street and they'll tell you we don't have an accent.
Nobody thinks they have an accent. And that's because you're somewhere where you belong and everybody around you sounds like that.
That's
so
right. Yeah.
Everybody else has one.
Of course. Yeah.
And the other thing about Australia too, our accent doesn't change from state to state particularly. I mean, you've got to have a very, very good ear to pick up if someone's from Queensland or WA or South Australia.
Which is different than London because you can go a few blocks and the accent changes.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I know from where I grew up, I mean, the accent where I lived, there were at least 3 within a couple of miles. So, I mean, literally, village to village, they were speaking with a different accent.
A lot of times it's the geographic boundaries that keep an accent in place. And it may be that, your ancestors were roamers and they just took the language everywhere and it stayed.
Yeah, it's funny actually because without going too deep into this, but there is one thing about Victoria as opposed to the rest of Australia. There's a little piece of Irish and it's the TH sound in Victoria that I haven't heard in any other part of Australia.
It has to do with who settled there.
Yeah, and it was mainly Irish because of the convicts.
Yes, in American and Appalachia, that American accent has a Scottish twang to it because that's who settled in Appalachia. Or the New Orleans accent, it's trappers from Canada, French Canada, along the American border with Canada, you have very distinctive Scandinavian lilt to the accent. So it has everything to do with who got there, settled, and set up the language.
Yep. Well, we've all seen Fargo, the movie, and that was very bit Scandinavian there, I think.
Yes, you betcha.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, I have to say,
Absolutely.
and an enlightening one too. So I'm going to have to go and do some work now to work out how I'm going to market myself. Puzzled. Head scratcher.
I look forward to that phone call.
I will be giving you a phone call. Stand by.
Well, I think the interesting thing for me that I took out of this, though, I have to say, is that even though, we were talking specifically about voiceover artists, I think there's plenty of lessons for audio engineers and radio imaging producers like me to take from this, the lessons of, stand alone and, do something different and have a different sound are just as useful, right?
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that extrapolates to everyone on the planet. If you want to stand out, you have to give people a reason for seeing you separated from all the other choices. That's our responsibility now as self-marketers. And I, for one, am delighted because it gives everyone the ability to show up uniquely as opposed to years ago where there were categorical reads and you either fit in a category or you didn't. And now you create your own category.
Yeah. Sage advice.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
I'll look forward to meeting you personally when I'm there.
Yeah, make sure you keep in touch and let us know, yeah, when you're down, and we'll catch up for a beer and maybe pack a scrum in the pub while we're at it.
Get lofty.
I'll have to start rehearsing now.
Fantastic. We'll catch you when you're down here or see you over there.
Okay, look forward to it. Take good care.
Thanks for that. See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, there you go. That was Marice Tobias. Interesting lady, and she certainly helped a lot of people with their careers, and you never know, might even help me.
I think you'll be on it.
Yes.
Got a client.
Indeed. Well, that's pretty well the end of this show, but if you do have any questions, go to our Facebook, because we never promote this, which is ridiculous. It is the Pro Audio Suite podcast. You just jump on that and lay a question up on Facebook, and we'll probably get to it in about 6 months when we remember to check our Facebook.
We're such regimented people.
Yes, we are. All right, well, that's this show. So we're busily organising the next one, and we will have a guest, but I'm not quite sure who it is just yet. But I can tell you in about a month, we will have a special guest from Stuttgart.
Yeah.
From Benstown, talking about radio imaging, which would be fascinating. So I'm looking forward to that one.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. Well, enjoy your fortnight, chaps.
Indeed.
We'll
George
chat
might
soon.
even bother to make an appearance next time.
Oh, he was here now. He's just been asleep. He loves this show. It's like ASMR for him. He just...
Oh, dear. All right. On that
I
note.
would never live that down.
And we won't let him either.
No, indeed.
Our show is so exciting. Our own hosts fall asleep.
Oh, dear.
On that note, I'm out of here.
See you next time.
Bit of a snooze.
Bye.
Goodbye, goodbye. Wipe the tear, baby dear, from your eye. Though it's hard to part, I know I'll be tickled to death to go. Don't cry, don't sigh. There's a silver lining in the sky. Bonsoir, old thing, cheerio, chin chin, na poo toodaloo, goodbye.